Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I just got back from Mississippi about 7 hours ago, and I am excited to start bringing to you my videos from the Vicksburg campaign. Man, it was an incredible experience. My favorite historical trip I've ever taken. Shout out to everybody that came for our meetup. We had 12 people that showed up to tour the Vicksburg battlefield. So that was really cool. That was a lot of fun. And I'll have a lot more to say about that in the coming days. I'm going to be probably doing a live stream this weekend sometime just to share my thoughts about Vicksburg and how my perceptions have changed about that battle and that campaign after my visit to the actual sites. Also, for those that will be asking, I was expecting to get the last 2 episodes of the Turkish Century up this week, but that's not happening until early next week. So Monday and Tuesday, we will finish that series, and then we're going to go right into the 30 Years' War by Extra History. But for today, I thought I would dive into something quick so I could get some more content up to you. Welcome to everybody who's new. It seems like we're getting a lot of new subscribers the last few days. So this is going back to one of my first historical loves, which is the Titanic. The discovery of the Titanic in 1985 is what first caused me to fall in love with history. I was 8 years old. I found myself wanting to know everything I could about the Titanic when they discovered it. And so it's always been something I've been fascinated by. This is simple history talking about, did Titanic's violinists really keep playing when the ship sank? I've done a couple of other videos about the Titanic, and the links are in the description below to that other Titanic themed content. But let's go ahead and dive into this one.
The Titanic's Violinists, April 15, 1912. By the early 20th century, ocean travel was for the wealthy, being a luxurious experience with newer, bigger, and more opulent liners being launched every year.
Now, it's a little bit misleading maybe to say ocean travel was for the wealthy. Ocean travel as a leisure activity was for the wealthy. Still, a lot of people were traveling the ocean to immigrate somewhere else. So people were coming across to go to America, and other places like that. But yeah, Titanic is built very much with the rich folks in mind, and kind of that just kind of over the top kind of grandeur, and some of the stuff that was on the ship is just was ridiculous for the time. By modern standards, it's a pretty tiny ship compared to the cruise ships we have today.
In the race to build bigger, better, and faster ships, the British White Star Line Company commissioned the construction of the RMS Titanic, hoping it would be the ultimate in comfort and more like a floating 5-star hotel than just a superior passenger liner.
And there's a bit of a luxury ship arms race going on between the Cunard Line and the White Star Line, which eventually became one company. So you've got like Cunard built the Lusitania, for example. So that was one of their new ships that's coming out during this time. Titanic is one of 3 ships, the Olympic, the Britannic, and the Titanic, that are all built as sister ships. They're made in Belfast, Ireland, and that's a fascinating story in and of itself, the construction of those ships. And there's a museum there that I cannot wait to visit someday, right there at the dock where Titanic was built.
Launched in 1912, the Titanic was an impressive vessel, weighing in at a colossal 52,000 tons, being 882 feet or 250 meters long, and could carry over 2,400 passengers. These passengers could be accommodated into 3 different classes of cabins. First class accommodation was for 833 passengers, second class accommodation was for 614 passengers, and third class accommodation, the cheapest, commonly called steerage, was for 1,006 passengers and would normally be for the emigrants seeking a new life in transit on their way to America and Canada.
And that's not just on Titanic. That was most ships. They had steerage class, and the first class, you've got like multiple rooms. You've got your own servants and things like that that'll help you. By the time you get to steerage, you're talking about like 4 guys on bunk beds with one common restroom down in the middle somewhere, that kind of thing. I should mention, because I know somebody will correct me on this, I did say Belfast, Ireland earlier. It's Northern Ireland. I don't want to offend anybody. It is Northern Ireland.
And of course, there were around 908 crew, which included officers, engineers, stokers for the boilers, catering staff, waiters, housekeeping, laundry, room service, and musicians to keep the passengers entertained. 696 of these perished in the sinking, and only 212 survived, which meant that 76% of the crew died altogether, which was a higher death rate than there was among the third-class passengers.
Let's talk about that death rate for a minute, because that's one of the untalked about stories of Titanic, is the death rates among the different classes of passengers, and we'll talk about why that is in just a second. Okay, here you go. So ICUC.org. Women overall among the entire ship, 72% of all women passengers survived. 91% of the female staff survived, which there was only 22 of them. So in total, 75% of all women survived. Only 50% of the children survived. And you're going to see that a lot of those were in third class. Of men, 16% of men survived. Male staff and crew, 21%. So actually the male crew had a higher rate of survival than the male passengers did. So overall, 37% of passengers, 23% of crew survived. Now, here's class, and it's broken down again. So 97% of first-class women survived. 86% of second-class women survived, but only 49% of third-class women survived. Children, 86. Second class, all 25 second-class children survived. Only 31% of third-class survived. It's really heartbreaking when you think about that, the differences here. 32% of first-class men, 8% of second-class men, 13% of third-class men. So overall, first class had a 62% chance of survival, which is the only group that was better than 50%. So kind of sad when you think about it. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Among those was the fact that third class was down on the bottom of the ship, which means that they had to travel a lot further and get past all the other people to get there. There was also, it took a while before they started even warning people that they should get off, and a lot of people didn't believe that it was actually sinking at first. There's a lot of stuff involved, but it just really is kind of sad when you think about it that way.
Among these was the Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, who in true naval tradition went down with his ship. Because reliable logs weren't kept on the passengers boarding the ship, it was estimated that between 1,503 and 1,517 of them perished in the incident.
So that means there were like 700 that survived, about a third of the people on board. There are stories about what happened to Captain Smith. Most eyewitnesses last put him in kind of on the bridge at the wheel as it goes down, and it was in the front, so it went down pretty early compared to the back of the ship. But there are eyewitness accounts that have him in the water after the ship sank and near a lifeboat, and the people tried to take him in, and he refused to be taken in.
The first-class passengers could enjoy the very latest in luxury that included a sizable swimming pool, a well-stocked library, several smoking rooms, a gymnasium, a large theater, a plush ballroom, a sumptuous lounge, as well as the very best in fine dining that could be enjoyed at the lavish a la carte restaurant and the highly fashionable Café Parisien. The Titanic even had its own 8-piece band, led by 33-year-old Englishman Wallace H. Hartley, a professional musician who didn't actually work directly for the ship's owners, but instead worked for an agency who supplied players to the White Star Line Company's fleet of passenger liners. He had previously served on the prestigious RMS Lucania shortly before it was scrapped in 1909, as well as the distinguished RMS Lusitania, which years later was sunk during World War I by a German U-boat with a heavy loss of life.
And, Captain Smith is similarly someone with a lot of experience on a lot of different ships. And he was not going to be, I don't think, the long-term captain of Titanic. This was Titanic's maiden voyage, and so Smith was like the best they had in the White Star Line. And so I think that was why he was chosen for this kind of first voyage. But he wouldn't have been, if Titanic had continued in operation after that, he wouldn't have continued to be the captain.
In 1912, Hartley had taken up the job as bandmaster for the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. He was hoping that if he was himself noticed by the wealthy clientele on the Titanic, it could lead to some additional bookings in the future, as Hartley needed to earn some extra money as he had just got engaged. The band's wages were very low. They were actually reduced from the normal rate to only £4 per month by the agency that employed them, and they didn't enjoy many privileges. They worked long hours, typically from 8 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock in the evening. And although booked as second-class passengers, they were only given third-class cabin accommodation.
That sucks. And, you know, that's actually not all that unusual even today. If you look into, like, the work hours and, you know, how much crew members have to do, even entertainers on cruise ships today, it's pretty brutal work.
On the night of April 14, 1912, just 4 days after the Titanic had set off on its maiden voyage from the English port of Southampton, the ship struck an iceberg off the coast of southeast Canada.
And it didn't just stop in Southampton. I think they stopped in Cherbourg, France, and also in what was then called Queenstown in Ireland on the southern coast. I think it's spelled C-O-B-H, I want to say, but it's not pronounced that way, and I don't want to get the pronunciation wrong. It's pronounced differently than it looks, but it used to be called Queenstown.
It sank in less than 3 hours, with a loss of over 1,500 lives. The Titanic carried only 20 out of a possible 48 lifeboats on its maiden voyage, as maritime safety regulations at the time stated that they only had to carry enough boats for a third of the ship's total human capacity.
And they actually had more than the minimum, because even though half these boats weren't launched full, I mean, a lot of them were half empty when they put them down, they still managed to rescue a third of the passengers. They could have gotten a lot more on, obviously, but they didn't want to clutter the deck with lifeboats.
Even with a lack of lifeboats, a lot of them were lowered into the sea only half full, mainly because most of the men would have stayed on board because of the code of conduct at the time, known as the Birkenhead Drill, which called for women and children to be saved first in any life-threatening situation, especially when abandoning ship. It is said that Wallace and his band members gallantly stayed on the deck, playing non-stop music right to the very end in order to avoid panic among the many scared and bewildered passengers still on board the sinking vessel.
You think about the kind of guts it takes to do that. Some people call Wallace Hartley and his band heroes, and I don't have a problem with that label in this case because everybody else is kind of fending for themselves. These guys know that they could be trying to save themselves, but they're going to stand there and play instead. It takes a lot of guts to do that.
The band consisted of 3 violinists, 3 cellists, 1 double bassist, and 1 pianist. Some survivors of the tragedy claim that the last tune they heard the band playing on the deck was the hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee." All 8 members of the band were drowned in the tragedy, and Hartley's body was recovered 2 weeks later by a deep-sea cable repair ship. He still had his life jacket on, and tightly strapped to his body was his instrument case.
I want to correct something he said there. He said that all 8 members drowned. The majority of people who died on Titanic did not drown. They froze to death. Most people survived the sinking of the ship and were floating in the water afterwards and froze to death. The water was below freezing. It was like 28 degrees, which, you know, ocean water doesn't freeze at 32 degrees like, ice cubes would. So it was actually below freezing, and hypothermia would have happened really, really fast. But there were hundreds of people floating in the water alive after the ship had gone under the water. It's very, very sad to think about that. And they recovered hundreds of bodies. A lot of them, like the third-class passengers, they recovered them, kind of recorded the information about them, and then buried them at sea. They only actually brought back to shore a limited number of bodies, which were buried in Halifax in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Containing his beloved violin. He was given a hero's funeral back in England at his hometown of Colne in Lancashire. It's estimated that around 40,000 people lined the route of the funeral procession to pay their last respects to Hartley.
Here's a guy in third-class accommodations, working long hours, not getting paid very well, on a ship entertaining rich people. But because of how he lived his final moments, 40,000 people came to his funeral. That's a legacy that is to be proud of. So let's take a look at something real quick. This is kind of cool. So there's his violin right there. Wallace Hartley's violin. You can see there the guy that played him in the movie. A $1 million violin that survived the sinking of RMS Titanic is going on display at a history museum in Branson, Missouri. So I guess, I don't know if it's still there. Somebody can maybe let me know that. But the Branson Museum and its sister facility in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, currently hold more than 400 artifacts recovered from the disaster. There. Look at that right there. For Wallace on the occasion of our engagement from Maria. That's incredible. That is, oh man, I get chills just looking at that. What a piece of history that is.
A memorial and bust were erected in Cologne in 1915 in his memory and in recognition of his bravery. His violin was given to his fiancée, and when she died in 1939, it was donated to a charity. It remained lost and forgotten about until in 2006 it was discovered in someone's attic. Once it had been identified and its provenance confirmed, it went on to sell at auction in 2013 for a staggering $1.7 million.
Wow.
2 hours after the Titanic had sunk to the bottom of the sea, the RMS Carpathia arrived on the scene and rescued 710 survivors out of the water. Some people narrowly avoided embarking on the maiden voyage. Among these were the members of the London Symphony Orchestra, who were booked on the trip for a 3-week tour of the US and Canada, but who had rescheduled their voyage and had gone on the SS Baltic a week earlier. And
I want to say J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on board too. He was like a part owner of the company, through an investment or something.
Instead, 4 crew members also had a lucky escape because they had been drinking in the Grapes pub in Southampton and failed to board the Titanic in time for its departure.
Dang.
The last survivor of the sinking was Milvina Dean, who died in 2009. She was only 9 weeks old when she was rescued.
That's awesome. I always been fascinated by that story. Like I said, I've got links in the description to the other stuff where I've talked about Titanic. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your interesting tidbit about the Titanic, stories that maybe people don't know a lot about. Use the comment section below, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.